The end product, what's best for the county. I had a conversation with Jeff. Since it was like 6 years.
Yeah, I pulled that up.
Yeah.
Actually, no. Actually, there's more of a drop down. And then some of the meeting spreadsheets are so.
Well, it's running pretty slow, and Jeff's going to start the meeting. But then what I do is I make a copy and go to annotate.
Yeah.
Then I can make any notes I want, any questions I have. Here, this is what we got tonight. The workshop, I had no questions, but I'll put a 1. If I had a question, let's say here, I'll take something like that. Citizens to be heard. That way I know there's something there I'm going to question. We'll get you set up. Not today, but
I'm gonna get coffee. Dang.
it is 4 o'clock.
We're going to call the St. Clair County Board of Commissioners workshop to order. Please, roll call.
Commissioner Smasko?
Here.
Commissioner Baldwin?
Here.
Commissioner Beeden?
Present.
Commissioner Torello?
Here.
Commissioner Rushing?
Here.
Commissioner Vanden Bosch?
Here.
Commissioner Chairperson Bowles?
Here. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 2, additions, deletions, changes to the agenda. Seeing none, do I have a motion for the agenda?
So moved, Baldwin.
Support Rushing.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Are there any citizens to be heard at this time? Any citizens wishing to address the county board? Seeing none, we're going to move into new business, American Rescue Plan Act funds. I'm going to turn this over to Carrie. She's got a PowerPoint. She's going to talk a little bit about it.
Thank you. So I thought we would start. Many of you are going to recall this presentation. I gave a similar one in early 2021 when the funds came out. However, it's a slightly updated version. It includes the final rule, and it also includes just what we've done to date in the process that the board has used to date. So just a quick recap of the funds the county received. And I think what's important to know is all local units of government in St. Clair County were also eligible to receive their own funds. So overall, that amounts to approximately $62.5 million. What is important to note about the local units or for any of the funds is everyone had to apply for the funds. So what I'm showing you on these slides are the estimates of what everyone was eligible to receive. I don't know which local units may or may not have applied for the funds, but this is what everyone was eligible for. This is, just information. It's a quick breakdown by district in the each municipality of what funds were available that I showed on the previous slide. This is just information for you to have or to refer to at a later time if you need it. But we'll go into the eligible uses. Now, the eligible uses really haven't changed from the interim rules that initially came out. They've just kind of been refined, defined, and more questions answered. So eligible uses include support for the public health response, and that includes COVID-19 mitigation measures for support, prevention, medical expenses, behavioral health care, mental health care, preventing, responding to violence. And part of that, many of our internal department projects did fall into this category that the board has previously approved. Many of the facility improvements we have made have improved air quality in our buildings, maybe some more physical separation of employees that were in very tight spaces or public. So when we go through the projects that you'll see later, the majority of them did fall into this category. The second category is very broad. It's to address the negative economic impacts, and that includes delivering assistance to workers, families that were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, support for small businesses, recovery for impacted industries, and rebuilding public sector capacity. And what that is rehiring public sector staff or employees that may have been laid off as a result due to COVID-19. Now at the county, we did not make any workforce reductions. While we did have the period of the state required shutdown, and we did have a few employees that were laid off because they weren't able to come back. However, we did not reduce our workforce in any way as a result. This category is very broad. When it talks to the impact to household and communities, that could mean assistance to the households that meet certain poverty guidelines, capital improvements. What is important to note in this category under the capital expenditures is those capital expenditures, we are required to submit a written justification for anything over $1 million, and anything is greater than $10 million also has additional reporting requirements. So in order for capital expenditure to be in this category, it has to basically be proportionate to the impact. So it can't be general economic development. It has to very specifically tie to an industry that was impacted by COVID. The next category is to replace public sector revenue loss. So when the government was shut down, we were not able to provide services or collect different revenues. So as a result, we had a significant reduction of revenues, certainly in 2020 and 21 and going forward. So I do have a couple slides specifically on this, so I'll touch on that a little bit later. There is a provision to provide premium pay for essential workers, and these are workers that require daily face-to-face interaction, healthcare, grocery, food services, education, childcare, sanitation. There are restrictions on this. It has to be workers that are basically hourly. Workers that are exempt under the Fair Labor Standards Act do not qualify in this category. And they do list some different income guidelines. So this premium pay is basically intended for the frontline workers. It's not intended for the high-paid or your high-paid executive type workers. Water, sewer, infrastructure. This is also a very broad category. So any projects that would qualify under the Clean Water Revolving Act or the Drinking Water Fund qualify under this category. Now, the final rule did expand it a little bit to give a little bit more flexibility for repairs to culverts, dams, reservoirs, and for some lead pipe replacement. And the last category is broadband infrastructure, and this is to help underserved areas. They have different specifics on speed and those types of things to define those areas. One thing to note under this category, though, is there are additional funds available outside of the state and local funds that were given that have been made available for broadband. So there are additional pots of money under the different federal acts that are also eligible for this. So the lost revenue calculation, initially when the rules came out, there was an annual calculation that governments were required to do based on a formula that was developed by the Treasury. The final rule simplified it where governments can choose to just take a flat $10 million and not have to do that annual calculation. As you can see from the sheet here, we're able to do that for years 2020 through 2024. And we have gone through and done the calculation per the Treasury requirements. And currently, we have $8.1 million of lost revenue for the 2 years. So it would be to the county's advantage. And we have elected to do that calculation each year. So the funds that are applied to the lost revenue calculation, those funds have less restrictions and can be used for any provision of government service. So any service that a local government or is able to pay for could fall under the lost revenue. There are a few restrictions on that, of course. So even though it can be for any government services, there are several things that are very specifically in the Act that these funds cannot be used for, whether it's in either of the other categories or lost revenue. We are not allowed to put any additional contributions into our pension fund. This cannot be for any existing for debt service. The funds cannot go into a rainy day fund or reserve account. Settlement agreements or any activities that conflict with the rescue plan statute or that are in violation of the grant agreement or conflict of interest provisions. You know, so what this means for us is, and I have received this question, you know, why can't you put this money into the pension fund, you know, for the unfunded liability, but the Act very specifically prohibits us from using this to pay any existing debt. It's meant to be used prospectively for the different uses laid out and not pay down your existing debt. So unfortunately, even if we do apply it to lost revenue, we are not allowed to spend it in those categories. So if we look at the process to date that the board has followed, in 2021, we did call for projects from all department heads, any projects they felt would fall under the categories listed. And those projects were submitted and approved by this board. So projects were submitted, they're reviewed internally by a group, by myself, the finance director, and by Dave Struck, our planning director, and my deputy administrator. We're all reviewed against the standards to make sure that they qualify, and all of those projects that qualified were brought to the board for approval. The board did also allocate funds to each commissioner district, and those projects, individual projects, each have come to the board for approval as they've come in. There are still some unallocated funds for the districts, which you'll see on the ARPA spending report that is in your board packet monthly. There were several additional projects that were also approved by the Board of Commissioners. Those included some retention payments, the spongy moth spray, and those are also listed on the board report that I'll show next. But currently there is about $23.3 million that has been not allocated, so unallocated and available for future projects. So I know this is super small to see on here. There is a hard copy at everyone's place of this report, and it's also available on our website in the agenda packet in Novus for anybody that wants to see it. This report is produced monthly and goes under the consent agenda, and this is a summary of the funds that have been allocated and reimbursed to date. I think the things to note is for all these projects and the projects for commissioners and commissioner districts is if we are giving funds to, whether it be another municipality or nonprofit, all of those entities are required to follow all of our purchasing policies and procedures. Since these are federal funds and subject to the single audit, we do require all the subrecipient reporting from them. So if funds are given to, let's say, a nonprofit, if they're depending on the type of project, they have to get bids and quotes for all of their different capital projects, and the funds are only given on a reimbursement basis. So if a municipality requests, is granted, $20,000 for a project, we don't just give them $20,000. They do have to submit their receipts, their canceled checks, before we will reimburse them. So one thing to note, I'll go back to the lost revenue piece of it. So currently we have 8.1 million in lost revenue for the 2 years we've calculated. 2022 hasn't been calculated yet because we don't have all of our payables and receivables in. That'll be done closer to the audit. But currently, 6.5 million has already been applied to that lost revenue with projects that the Board of Commissioners has already approved. So going forward, when you develop your spending plan, you'll have to be mindful of what category the projects fall in, or if it's something that needs to be applied to lost revenue. We are certainly not going to have the full 31 million in lost revenue. We anticipate that revenue loss will go down each year, and you can see from the 2 years that 2020 was quite large. It was a little bit less in 21, and we do think that will keep shrinking each year because our revenues have rebounded back to where they should be. But we do know it is going to be greater than 10 million, so it is to our advantage to do that calculation each year. So I guess right now, going forward, would be the process the board would like to use for the remaining funds. I know there have been some questions I received on internal projects, and I would like to refer the Board of Commissioners to the county's current capital improvement plan that you approved last November. These are all of the projects that were submitted in the capital improvement plan. There's approximately $42 million worth of projects on there, and about $30 million of that does not have an external funding source or funding source, meaning, landfill projects, the landfill fund is self-sustaining on user fees, so those projects are funded from landfill fees, but many of these are improvements required to our existing county facilities, such as roof replacements. There are some dispatch upgrades, some items for the sheriff's office. So if the board would like to potentially consider internal projects, the current capital improvement plan would be an excellent place to start. But that's all I have on the requirements, unless anyone has questions. And then I guess next will be discussion on the process you would like to see from us going forward for the remaining funds.
Questions for Carrie on any of this? So next steps moving forward. When we first received this money, before we even received the money, I probably got 50 requests from everybody. I mean, everybody had their hand out for different stuff, right? Just the reality of. And at the time, I said, hold on, let's just step back. Let's take a look, money's where we're gonna spend, so on and so forth. One of the big problems that we currently have in St. Clair County, Dan Casey, I want you to get up there because you can reiterate some of the things. I am a big economic development guy. I think those that know me know I bricks and mortar, kind of live that. This Magna plant's a great example of a project that we've recently received. We're going through the expansion, obviously in St. Clair right now. The next Magna plant comes along, where do we have to put it?
Well,
Nowhere? Maybe one site?
we have maybe one site that's sort of development ready.
Yeah, so what we're seeing, and Dan, you guys all know Dan Casey, President of Economic Development Alliance. We're seeing more opportunity probably in the last year than we have in 17 years or however long you've been on that organization. I'm the vice president of the EDA, so I get a chance to see all that stuff. A lot of these tracts of land, 60 acres, 80 acres, 100, 200, these types of things. And in these investments, recently $4 billion on one, $2 billion on another. We're seeing lots of stuff in the EV space. Whether you like it or hate it, so be it, but that's what, these opportunities that are coming to us. If you look at the Magna plant in St. Clair, that's going to be 1.1 million square feet with 1,200 jobs. We've seen the list of those jobs. 300, 400 of those jobs are six-figure jobs. They're playing in a global economy, all right? They're bringing people in from all over. So the hindrances that we run into are water and sewer, period, right? So when you have large tracts of land, you don't have water, sewer, power, so on and so forth, you can't even submit for some of these projects. Now, you'll hear later about the 26-mile road corridor and why we've been talking about 26-mile road corridor, which, just so everybody knows, we started the 26-mile corridor conversation a year and a half ago. And I'm pointing at Joe because he's a Casco Township supervisor. We went to all the different township supervisors and had asked them, does it make sense to take a look at the 26-mile road corridor and look at zoning, look at water, sewer, so on and so forth. In the importance of that corridor study, Bill Hazelton's in the room. Bill will tell you, if you're ever even going to do road expansions, if you're going to do any kinds of things anywhere, you will be required to have these studies to get funding for these things. Okay, so. Hey, if the water and sewer never happens in Marine City Highway, at least we have the how-to manual on the expanding the road down there and those types of things. So there's a multifaceted, approach. So we went to Casco, Cotterville, China, IRA. Does this make sense? Overwhelmingly, all the boards, I think 3 out of the 4 were 7-0, passed it. 1 was 5-2. Saying that they wanted to move forward. So this isn't something that just like we pulled out of the sky and, dreamed up. We did a lot of the stuff. So, here we are, that particular study's complete. Now, I guess my question to the board is, the county is the only one that can do the heavy lifting on this infrastructure. Small township, Casco Township can't put a water or a sewer treatment facility in for $30 million, or it ain't gonna happen. Right? That's just a reality of. So if the county is truly wants to lead in jobs, tax base, these types of things, we're the ones that got to kind of step up and help and I guess participate in some of this to do it. The piece that we've been talking about a lot, and we've had multiple meetings now recently in Ira Township, Dave and myself, we've been, I don't even know, 4, 5, 6 meetings down there. Ira Township is currently looking at building a treatment facility down in Ira Township. Now, I even want to take one step back. Why 26-mile road? This isn't Jeff Bohm dreaming up 26-mile road. This is the industry, the market dictating where these go. And 26-mile road, close to 94, proximity to the workforce, Macomb County workforce, right? These are the driving factors. These are the requests that Dan's agency is getting for submittals for these projects, right? They're not asking for, I hate to say, maybe the solar companies are asking for 800 acres out in, Yale or Berlin or wherever.
1,600 currently.
1,600, right? But so you have that in those particular areas, but the manufacturing types of jobs, things that they're looking for, it's 26-mile road corridor. So I don't look at this as being, because this is in Dave and Dave's district, it's not in Jeff Boehm's district, you know, I look at the fact when you can bring big employment basis, St. Clair's a great example, and Steve, your son-in-law is a great example too, you know, living out in a rural area, driving in, you know, working there,
I
got
had
a
a
good
son
job.
that worked in a weld shop over in Elmont and came home looking like a chimney sweep pretty much every night. And when that magnet came in, he was a certified welder, he got a certificate, and he went over there and they trained him in robotic welding. And he's a really bright guy, nice, good kid. And they took him up because he's quality and they trained him in this. And he comes home with a polo shirt on and he runs robotic welding and he's probably lived longer because of it. So your point is there are
Yeah.
good things that can come from that.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily look at, you know, whose district these things are in, because at the end of the day, the county receives a
And
5.6.
Kyle lives in Canokie Township. He lives.
Yeah, he lives next-
He lives by the farm out by me. He drives in 20 minutes rather than 40 minutes and it's a nice deal for him.
Yeah, so I emphasize those just because wherever these jobs locate, there's opportunities for everybody in St. Clair County. The thing that, you know, and I'm not being a proponent of putting 15 or 20 million out to a project and not getting our money back. I don't want anybody to think that we're just gonna stroke a check. There are funding mechanisms that are in place that if the county were to participate to essentially loan money to help assist in a project, we're going to be able to get our money back on these projects. And there's a, I don't know if that, you have that little magnet chart there? You want to say anything? I'd let you say about 2 words, Dan. I'm cannibalizing the whole conversation.
You're doing fine.
Well, why don't you see, tell what you see in the
You're
marketplace, what
talking
we're
about this
getting?
LDFA funding piece of it.
Well, I'm just using this LDFA as an example because when we put money into a project, the ability to recapture money to pay for the infrastructure to pay you back exists. So when somebody says, well, you know, hey, Bo wants to spend 15 million bucks or 20 million or whatever on, you know, water and sewer, this is a loan to a municipality to help them achieve what they have to, and then we're able to recoup our money over a period of time. So I don't want this misconception that I'm just saying hand them over 20 million bucks and we're not getting our money back. Now, that is very hard to see if you're sitting out there in the audience, but if you look at, this is the expansion of the Magna, and this is why I'm using this as an example, because these are the type of projects that we are currently seeing that we are shortlisted for a couple of these projects on 26 Mile Road. But the annual capture, and this is on the Magna's expansion piece, is about 1.5 million a year that you would be able to recapture to help pay for some of these infrastructure improvements. Ira Township, we'd met with them, they would be willing to accept a Renaissance zone. Renaissance zones are a no tax for 15 years. But what the state will do in a Renaissance zones for particular projects, they will hand you the money up front. The one project's roughly 35 million, give or take, they're talking about, right? So yes, you don't see any taxing for a 15-year period, but the state pays you up front. The 35 million is going to cure a lot of the headaches in the water and sewer world, right? The problem that we have right now in water and sewer, if we want to continue down this path, and I don't have a hard number tonight for you as far as what, you know, what the participation level, I got kind of some estimates. But we need to get to a situation that these projects need to have some engineering. They need to almost be in type of a shovel-ready status. I reached out to Congresswoman McLean's office to inquire about participation in 26 Mile Road. If you see recently, St. Clair County received 4 earmarks. Clay got 1.5, I think Port Huron Township was 1.4, City of St. Clair was $1 million, King Road Bridge, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't have anything that I can actually even submit because I truly believe there's help. $5 million kind of stuff. I looked at a lot of the different projects, what they were funding, different projects in different districts. So if we want to go, you know, move forward with this path to loan, and I want to use the word loan, hire some money to assist with the water sewer, sewer, actually, they have water capacity. A, we would be able to recapture over time. B, we need to get that project, so when we're talking about earmarks, something's in the hopper that we can, you know, have a project. So I've been very focused on that. Be quite honest, I haven't looked at a lot of the other stuff because, and we've done a good job. I mean, a lot of people got their money and they couldn't spend it quick enough, right? We have till 2024, to the end of 2024, that these monies have to be allocated. So that's just me, you know, talking out loud, kind of where I'm at. I knew, you know, and I wanted to put this workshop on. Obviously, we got some new board members. I'm not sure the direction they wanted to go or how you guys want to go about this ARPA funds as a group, as a whole. So kind of open for discussion. Start with you, Dave.
Well, I'm also, with that water and sewer, we talked with Ira, they brought up a huge issue that we're gonna face countywide shortly. Now that the rains are off for Eagle, we may see some of the things that happened in Wisconsin. And some of our treatment plants won't be able to get to the numbers that Wisconsin's going to now, because we all dump into the Great Lakes, and they've really changed the systems over there because of heavy metals and other contaminants, phosphates and that. And Ira's looking at some pretty interesting ways of handling wastewater, and I think it opened my eyes to a couple areas where we've got aging infrastructure in the whole, in a lot of our cities. And our wastewaters are gonna be a huge lift to keep them compliant, not just, we don't want a recreation of Flint water or issues like that. So I think by them bringing this to light, I think I've learned a lot more than I ever thought to about algae, besides trying to kill it. That's usually what I'm trying to do at the greenhouses, but they're raising it. And I think down the road, we may have to assist some of our communities in their wastewater treatment plants just to keep them solvent because of the issues they're gonna run into forward. And it may be an income provider for the communities.
And I forgot to, and I wanted to mention that, except the city of Port Huron, majority of these people are capacity issues, like the reason they're talking about expansion, because they're at capacity, they can't handle it anymore, right? Maybe one more project, right, you know? So that's consistent with St. Clair's got to go through a big expansion right now for the Magna, you know, so on and so forth. So we're running into that, and a lot of this stuff is 1960s, you know, kind of stuff. So, good point. I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's just, you know, growth that we're gonna have, and we wanna put water back into the Great Lakes that's clean. You know, we don't wanna continue to be the problem. So I think it's stuff we have to look at like that. And it could go hand in hand with development, you know, increase the quality of what we're doing.
David?
Got a lot of work went into Ira Township that I've been part of the meetings and appreciate being invited to them. With the Algonac sewage plant, there's roughly 3 communities that go there, Clay Township, Ira, and Algonac. That facility is gonna need substantial amount of monies if something in Ira Township does not happen. So if you're taking approximately 1/3 of the services in Ira Township, that would alleviate a lot of the pressure on the Algonac plant. Artie Bryson was part of it, and he's on board with working with Ira Township on this specific issue. Whether we go forward or not and the monies, but that's part of the conversation. Jeff and I have talked on this 26-mile road, which we're going to get to also. I think the information is definitely, you need to get the information so you can make decisions. Without that information, you can assume anything you want, plus or minus, positives, negatives. So we're going to get into that. As far as this treatment plant in Ira Township, it's going to give potentially a boost for the Marine City if they need it, for potential businesses that'll come in there. Without the water, and what Jeff brought up, without water and sewage treatment, they're not coming here anyways. If the cost would and I would need to see where it benefits. Jeff and I have talked, and I've talked with other commissioners. I first and foremost represent District 6. We got Joe Stevens here from Casco Township Supervisor and also Iris. So two of them are mine. But I need to justify what's going to happen to the other 4 or possibly the other 29 within St. Clair County. How are they going to benefit from it if we try to go forward with this kind of money for Ira Township, whatever that dollar amount is? And we are going to get a return. I'd want a formula, whatever that time frame is, whether it's 3 years, 20 years, whatever it is, on a potential loan to Ira Township to have them, because they do not have the monies in their budget. They're a smaller township. They're not like Fort Gratiot Township. They have much more money than Ira does. So potentially, we're going to be looking at assisting and giving them a loan, if that's the right terminology right now, and then have a payback to the county. If we do that on whatever projects we come up with, because we're talking about this Ira filtration plant currently, if it can benefit the county plus benefit the rest of who I represent, I can get on board and support that. If it's just going to be a cash cow for a specific one, I don't think that'd be a good thing for me to support. So I could ramble some more, but that's a short version.
Okay. Jay? Any ideas?
No, I'm good at the moment, thank you.
Steve?
Well, this matter, I try to get ahead of things as best I can, no matter what I do. And I was before the board in August of last year, and I put together a proposal. I presented in person and emailed everybody the proposal. I sent it out again. I'm sure you guys all got it. What I tried to do, I've got research capabilities. I like to study things. I look at things as best I can. And I surveyed around the country, actually, different states, municipalities, how they handle ARPA funds, and I basically ripped off some processes from some other jurisdictions that I thought were really good. So I'm not saying I was brilliant in my presentation, but what I'd really like to see, and Jeff, I was on this board 16 years ago. You started 18 years ago. We've worked on the board a long time. I know what excites you. I know what you like. I know you're an EDA guy, and I respect that. And you've led the county in that sphere quite well. But as you know, I take a different approach. I'm more of an operations guy, county operations, local control, that kind of thing. So we've rubbed shoulders on stuff before, and I do pretty much the same thing here, and that's what this presentation was essentially 3 phases. I wanted you to start back in September. You would have had 4 months to finish up, 2 months of information gathering, inform the public on the provisions, invite comment from county, open meetings, town halls, surveys. Since I was elected, I contacted county planning and showed them what I had done, and it's all things they can easily do. They have the survey capability, they have high-speed internet, they can do all that for us to really put that out there to inform the public on what these monies can be for. Invite comments from townships, municipalities, try to get the unique needs of the various communities. Administration has done a great job. I've looked at what Carrie put out. She sent me stuff whenever I asked for it. There's a list of things of county, capital improvement priorities, but there's also nonprofits, service organizations that do a lot of really good work in the community that I think need to have an opportunity to at least say, hey, this is a critical need. And a lot of times, a small amount can really take care of some big problems for people who are really, truly in distress. So there was that part of it. I suggested 60 days from September 1st to October, followed by prioritizations where we would set priorities, have staff review everything, segregate uniform broad proposals from county, local specific things, and try and balance it out so each district would get a fair amount of this monies. And I understand how that doesn't fit with putting it towards something that might develop a long-term corridor and develop these, have a spot ready for shovel-ready projects that can bring in tax base and bring in good jobs. Those are all good things, but I think there's a decision to be made which direction we go. And, the way I look at it is that we should first take care of business in the sense that, let's say you look at administration. A couple of things that Carrie had on her list one of them was firewalls for IT, $115,000. Let's get that done. If you need a firewall, I'm telling you, I've had hacking problems, I've had spyware, I've had ransomware. at work. You know, I have a law practice. That freaks me out. So, you know, there's a place you can spend some money real quick, move that up, right? Administration building needs a roof. I keep the roofs on my barns. Let's keep a roof on this place, right? Let's move some of that money to these kinds of things that are urgent. Road patrol radio replacement, $631,000. My wife was a police officer for many years. I'm a little sensitive to safety, you know, and they need to have good quality, the best stuff when they need it. So I guess my point is not that we're neglecting those things, but let's balance it with, you want to develop that corridor, and I've looked at that study inside and out, and I got a lot of questions for Wade Trim on what they put in, why they put in, and what we paid for with their study. But balance it, and the studies are necessary to get funding. If you're trying for any kind of grants, the first thing they say is, you know, well, do you have a study? If you don't, you're out of the game because it takes you, would it take you 8 months to get a study? So you've got the study, but my point being, I'd like to see things roll out in a fashion that, as I described, I guess. So that's my position. It's still the same position. I sent everybody an email today, said, you've heard this before. I said it before. That's where I come from. I don't intend to support anything that doesn't follow something like that. I don't want to be alone in the woods on this, but I'm going to stick with my guns on what I think needs to be done, and that's kind of where I'm coming from, is we need to take care of local priorities, or county priorities, see what we have for local priorities, spread that money around, put some towards things like a corridor if you want, but I'd like to see the process work itself through rather than, here, this stuff's on the table, what do you think, should we do it? I don't like that approach. So.
Georgia?
So this is money that, free money, right, that we all know is not free, that we only have because of the pandemic. So this is cash we have to decide what to do with, what we can, prioritize our needs, right? So I don't know that I necessarily look at it from district to district, because I figure, you know, we're all here to represent all of them. At some point, there is going to be one district who maybe needs a little more help than another. At the end of the day, that should be the common goal, though it rises up, if it rises up one district, in theory, it should be rising up the whole county, right? You have 3 kids, sometimes one of them needs more of my attention than the other 2, and you balance that out. So I don't know that I necessarily look at it as, if we spend more money in one district, that it's unbalanced. There are municipalities that didn't all get the same amount, I mean, based on the calculations. So it's already sort of unbalanced. Those municipalities have to decide how to spend that money. I do agree with Steve on prioritizing, though, the needs in-house. So with this money, what needs to happen right now, because this is money we weren't counting on, to make sure that something's not going to cost the county more money down the line. So what are those needs off of, you know, this sheet? What is kind of more of an urgent status? What's a need? What's a want? And then what's the return on investment? So I also, though, on the projects that I have funded within my own district, I didn't want it to be kind of a one and done. I wanted it to be something that would continue a return on investment, which is sort of where this Marine City, or the 26-mile corridor, falls in. So if there's a potential to put some of this money toward projects that will bring money back to continue to fund services, I'm all for that too. But I don't know that we're at a spot at the moment to say this need comes for, you know, I don't know that I've seen a list where the priorities are and how much money to each could get us over the finish line for some of these projects.
Lisa?
I think I'm going to echo what Commissioner Baldwin said. I think this one-time shot into our local economy is important to take care of things that we need to. But I also think we'd be missing opportunity if we don't invest in our future and we don't look at some of these opportunities where we can get some long-term gains out of this, for lack of a better term, bonus money that we weren't expecting. So I think I want to see a prioritized list from administration about internally what their hot buttons are, and then let's look at some projects where we can get that return on investment from that tax base.
Okay.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes.
20 seconds?
Yeah, no problem.
We do have Joe Stevens here from Casco Township. He's got a project, which I could go 31 different municipalities, and what he's proposing maybe be reasonable that we can look at. So he's just one. We'll be having 31 different elected boards that are going to have their priorities. City of Marysville might have something when they look at this. So I think that needs to be put on the or on the list, that we have consideration for everybody that we represent. So if we can fit in some of these other projects, whatever we're going to do with the monies, but get it on a priority basis. So short version. So I appreciate Joe being here and giving the report as far as working with the road commission on that short half-mile road.
Yeah, I need to get I don't want to say hard and fast from Ira, but, you know, a ballpark. They've been mumbling 10 to 15 million. Okay, I just got to pin them down to say, is it a $10 million loan? I want to remember, it's a loan. We are getting our money back because we're going to run into this issue, just not on 26, but as other segments of the county are going to develop in time, and it's going to eventually happen. We're going to need some type of funding mechanism to help assist to, you know, whatever we do. So, I will get with those guys too and just try to get a number. We'll have more conversation. Tonight wasn't, hey, you know, here's what we're spending the money on and everything else. I just had to kind of get a flavor for what the board is looking for. And I totally agree with you. Got to take care of in-house things, you know, first. The firewalls thing, Steve, is a point very well taken. There's particular things.
Jeff, you know, the report that our administrator gave, there's 23.3 million unallocated. So, like, let's say, looking at what you're talking about, let's say you put a loan out there, an LDFA recapture deal, and you use a portion of it. There's 23 left. Let's say you give them 8 or 10 or something, not all of it, right? Would you then be open to having more of a public input or access on the balance to open that up to other people?
Oh, no question about it. The only reason for the 26 and the IRA, I mean, we have literally, this has been a year and a half that we've been talking about this from the initial, do we do the studies, do we do everything? Somewhere along the line, we have to let them know if we're, you know, per se, in or out, right? Because we're at that point where we would have to
Are we
take.
going to talk about that in the next segment on this study, or are we going to talk about that now?
Well, we got a phone call here at 4:45 from the site selection guy from the state of Michigan, and he's actually calling in. Is that how we're doing that?
He should be joining us via WebEx. Okay, Paul said he's currently joining, so once he joins, he'll be up on the screen.
Yeah.
It's like a remote Zoom deal.
Yeah, WebEx, the WebEx.
So when he calls, we will actually flip it over to him. So to your point, Steve, I don't necessarily know, Steve, if I'm a proponent of going out to everybody asking, because the counties that have done that had $30 million, they got $80 million in asks, right? So then you have to sit there and go, oh, no, your project stinks. You know, yours is good, yours.
We got 63 million if you count all the direct assessments, so there's 63, we got 30, you know, and we're gonna do some carve out for as it's supposed to, and the balance of it still, I think, I would like to see a more open process, that's all.
Oh, I just don't know, like I said, and I don't know what the commissioners think, if they want to go out and put it out to everybody and, you know, look for projects. I mean, after maybe the in-house prioritize, should it be, we're gonna loan some money, then in-house projects, then the next type of thing, then we would go out.
I'll just suggest this, I will bet that if you put it out, and it will cause maybe some controversy, it'll make our job a little tougher to try and decide all these different things, there'll be a lot of them. But I will guarantee that you will find things that you will think, you know what, we really need to do that we don't even know about. And your 26-mile corridor project is laudable and it's good, but these other things are just as good and probably more needed. And I know we disagree on that, but at least open it up, and if 4 people on the board, or 5 or 6 or whatever it is, says we're gonna go this direction, I'm good with that. But at least have that conversation. That's what I'm striving for, because it's fair, and the public at that point, I think, will understand better what we're doing and why we're doing it, because it will require a lot of discussion, you know, a lot of our time, but I think it's worth doing.
We've we've been, you know, reached out. I've told 30 people no. I can assure you that. I mean, the floodgates were in when people found out we were getting money.
What are you doing telling people no? Wait a minute, I can't tell people no.
But I mean, it was just like, Georgia, you saw how many proposals. We got stuff from everywhere, you know. Dan, you want to say anything? I've had you sitting up there long enough.
Well, I could probably lead into Justin
Okay.
Robinson's comments. I don't know if he's on yet. Is he yet? He come in?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but he's on?
Okay, perfect.
Justin, are you there?
Oh, is this still on ARPA, or are you moving to the 26 mile?
He is, we can come back. We had to have them
This is the
scheduled.
guy that wrote the study.
No,
No.
no, 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 no.
This is,
No, I was asked to invite either someone from the state or someone from the Detroit Regional Partnership to talk about site readiness and about spending money to get sites ready for development.
That's actually in the study itself, but I get it.
Yeah.
I can give you some thoughts on why that's an important initiative in Michigan and why it'd be important to us. And that's why Justin's calling in, because Detroit Regional Partnership applied for the Build Back Better grant with other regional partners, which was an unprecedented federal government program. And they were awarded a significant amount of money to do several different projects. And one of those projects is to invest in doing site readiness within their service area, which is an 11-county area that we're part of. So we've been working with them for almost 2 years on a process to determine what sites, what type of things could be invested in, what's needed in the market, and a rating system so that they're just not throwing money into bad sites. They want to make sure they're good sites. And so ultimately, we wanted, some benefit from that in St. Clair County. And so they were awarded the money just recently. We've been working with them. We work with Detroit Regional Partnership on a lot of different economic development projects. Their primary job for the region is they attract industry to come to the 11 counties.
Is that a pool of state grant money or federal, or what is it?
It's federal money.
Federal through the state, I assume?
It's federal money
Okay.
that they received.
So you applied to a federal department rather than the state?
They applied for this Build Back Better grant program, and I think there were 3 or 4 awarded in the country. And so we were one of, or maybe it was, I might be wrong, it might be a couple more than that, but
There's a
at
state
any rate, there
office?
weren't many awarded around the country. but
Is
we
there a
were
state
one.
office does that, Dan? A state office gets the grant for the
No, the Detroit Regional Partnership pulled together a group of organizations that work in economic development and came up with projects, put together a proposal to the federal government, and ultimately they were awarded. The money is actually distributed through a number of federal departments, so it doesn't all come through just one. Some of it comes through the Economic Development Administration, some through the Department of Agriculture, and on and on and on, right? So there's a number of ways that the money could be spent, but one of the areas that they felt strongly was the need for doing site readiness. The basis for this really started about a year ago, or maybe just over a year ago, when Ford Motor Company announced that they were putting a battery plant in Tennessee and Kentucky. Significant investment that could have come to Michigan. And it didn't, because we didn't have a site ready in Michigan that was big enough, and they had the infrastructure in place. Whereas in Kentucky, the one site that they picked, the state had invested a couple $100 million to prepare the site over a 10 or 20-year period, and so they were ready when the opportunity came. Anyway, so Michigan took that badly, because we do not like losing automotive projects outside of Michigan, because it works against the strength of the cluster that we have here. The more the cluster gets diversified around the country, the less influence we have, and the less projects and jobs and investment that we get. So they didn't want to lose that project, and it was a wake-up call to the state legislature in Michigan, and it was a wake-up call to economic development agencies and communities that the state has not been focused on development-ready sites, ever. I've been in the field more than 20 years. We never talked about it until about 2 years ago. And so in St. Clair County, Jeff started off this conversation mentioning that. We have almost no development-ready sites in St. Clair County right now. The Magna site where they're locating is the only one that we really had that had the infrastructure and the studies done and all the other things that are needed to land projects. Well, that same story is played out all across Michigan. And so as the battery industry is growing, looking for sites, the semiconductor industry is growing, is coming back to the U.S. They're looking for sites. Some of these are really, really big sites, 800 acres, 1,000 acres, and more. And then there's the supply chain that supports them, that's coming with them, and those sites are a little bit smaller. But nonetheless, they all have the short time frames to get located. And so they're looking for development-ready sites. And so Michigan has been struggling because we don't have any. And so the state legislature put together the SOAR fund and recently, which they're putting into projects that are close to landing. And the SOAR money is being used for, in part, to put public infrastructure in place to support those projects.
Dan, I think we have, do we have him on the horn? What's his name?
Justin Robinson.
Justin, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm
Can
not
you
sure
hear
how
us
to
okay?
control video, but I'm here by voice.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Perfect.
So why don't we just toss it to Justin? He can talk about this from his perspective.
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity to join virtually. And this is an important issue, as Dan said, and we've been working closely with Dan's team for a number of years on this. But, you know, I'll share a little bit of background of why we got involved in the issue we see, but more importantly, the opportunity for those communities that are going to be proactive around this issue. And so we're the Regional Economic Development Agency. We cover Southeast Michigan, the 11-county region, and Dan's team has been a close partner with us since our formation a little over 4 years ago. And our mission is to market the region globally and attract new investments and jobs into the market. But really importantly, pay attention to structural business climate issues that are keeping us from being successful in doing so. And so while we have a great workforce, we have a great supply chain, right? We have leading companies in transportation and other technologies. One of our biggest constraints is around the site issue, right, and building issue. And so when you look across the entire region today, you know, everybody in the manufacturing space or logistics space, as they look at our community, thinks Detroit area is going to have a huge number of buildings available. Well, we're at a 4% vacancy rate, right? And in many in-demand areas like Dan's area, you know, that might be closer to 2%. So essentially, right, there's no building inventory available. And so it forces clients to look to land options, right? Either as a backup or sometimes as their primary solution. And as Dan said, we just are behind our competitors in Ohio and Indiana and many of the southern states in really readying vacant industrial land for projects. And I think the other thing we're seeing, this is the hottest market for industrial companies and jobs I've seen in the 20 years I've been doing this. I've heard others say 50 plus years. So the opportunities are out there. The challenge is these companies are moving on very fast timelines, often 18 months, right, from site location, right, decision to being operational. And so that gives communities like us very little time to make our case that we have the right sites or buildings for them, and we can move the pace they need us to move in order to do this work. And as a result of that, right, our lack of ability to make that case, we're losing a lot of projects, a lot of great projects that are setting the future for what the automotive and mobility industry will look like, the future of the logistics industry, et cetera. And so the Detroit Regional Partnership really flagged this as the third pillar we're willing to move into and work on because it's so important. And so we've been working with Dan and our other county partners to build a new program. We call it the Verified Industrial Properties Program. We are dedicating 3 new staff people to this. And we've raised an initial $7 million to go to work on this issue, which is not nearly enough. But we also just recently helped lobby the legislator to put $350 million at the state level into this issue. And so we're working to raise the dollars necessary to do this work. But it's really important that, you know, the counties and local communities also get on board and really taking a leadership role on this issue. So from our side, we're working to really hire engineering firms to look at sites, understands their strengths and weaknesses, but work with our partners to bring the dollars to the table to really invest in those sites. Overcome wetlands issues, water and sewer issues, utility issues. Just make sure that we understand what the communities want on these sites from a use perspective, the type of jobs they want there, and then that we can go out into the market and bring these sites to the open projects that are looking at the Midwest and the entire United States. I think it's important to note we're in the early stages of this work, but I think Dan and with the work he's doing in identifying sites in that 26-mile corridor, and also Port Huron and beyond are ahead of the curve. So I think you guys are well positioned. If you can get some sites ready in the near term, you guys will be able to, I believe, capture the projects that are out there circulating currently. But it does require investment. And so we're encouraging folks that have additional ARPA funds or other resources to really look at this issue and figure out how you guys can partner with your site owners, with municipal-owned sites, and others to really take some action around this. And I will just say, I think the sites Dan's talking about are really well positioned in that they, sit on the 94 corridor. They obviously can access jobs from across, or employees from across St. Clair County, but also Macomb County, which I think is important for companies. But ultimately, a lot of companies are looking to move beyond the core of Oakland and Macomb to sites that are a little bit further from competitors, but also giving them room for future expansion. So I think, with what Dan's proposing, you guys are in a great position to capture the growth that's coming our way as a region if we can get sites ready. With that, I will pause. Any, thing else, Dan, or for the board that you'd like me to maybe speak to, or any questions you may have?
Well, just one more thing I would add, and you touched on it a little bit. This last year has been absolutely unprecedented for the number of projects and the size of the projects that have come. And St. Clair County has been in the crosshairs because we're close to Metro Detroit. We have I-94 and we have I-69, which is an international freight corridor. We have the Blue Water Bridge. We're close to 25 automotive assembly plants. And we have big blocks of land that most places, you can't find it in Macomb, Oakland, or Wayne County, or even Washtenaw County, really. And so the state has been calling us when some of these big projects come out. Will you submit for this? They called us just a couple of days ago on a project that we passed on that requires 500 acres, and it's a $600 million investment. They want the project, but none of the other sites submitted in the state would work. And the company said, well, what about St. Clair County? So they came back to us and said, can you submit? Well, we don't have the water and sewer at the site that, they're looking at. So again, I just want to wrap up by giving you my quick opinion. I know you don't care, but this is my chance at the microphone, so I'm gonna say it anyway. The way that I view this ARPA money is you take care of your initial harm that happened, which is from COVID, which has already basically occurred with the expenditures that have been made. But this is one-time money, which means it's not going to be here again, 2 years from now or 5 years from now. It's not coming. So some of these projects that you mentioned that are deferred maintenance or that are basic public infrastructure things like, firewalls and things like that, you have your normal methods to fund those projects. You're not precluded from doing those projects the normal way that you would budget something and do it. But this money is one-time money. Why wouldn't you want to maximize the economic impact of those dollars? That's the way I look at it. Putting it into site readiness or putting it into public infrastructure that allows growth to occur where communities want it and where it makes sense, in my opinion at least, is what you should be doing.
Could I ask
Yes.
a question? Because I think a lot of people might be asking or thinking this anyways, but let's say you have a corporation that's going to bring $500 million in. to build their structure. Why wouldn't they throw in 20 million to get the sewer and water built? Just explain that to why they wouldn't want to do it. In St. Clair County, whether Washtenaw County, pick whatever county you want out of the 83, why wouldn't they throw an extra 10, 20 million into the project to be located in St. Clair County?
Because everybody wants that project and they know it. They don't have to spend the money.
It takes you 18 months warp speed to get a sewer treatment facility, right? So call it 2 years. Magna was a 10.5-month turn. It was a cornfield, and in 10.5 months was a 340,000. These companies aren't waiting. They're not.
You don't ask the question, but that's why I was.
Oh, yeah. No, it's a good question, but it's just a reality of a company's not going to say, okay, I'm going to locate here, but I got to wait 2 years. Because especially in the wonderful world of automotive, you sign a contract with General Motors, and you better be producing in, X amount of time.
Well, the reality in the case of St. Clair with Magna is that's a $426 million investment that Magna's making. They could have made that in a lot of different places. They picked St. Clair, right? The city had to make some commitments to land the project, and that included public infrastructure upgrades, and to the tune of $7 to $8 million that they have to fund in some way, shape, or form. So the question is, do you want the project or don't you? Really, that's what it came down to.
Any other
I'll just
questions
say
for Dan?
one comment there. It's all about timeline, right? They need to be operational, right, within a certain window of time, and your site either can deliver it or can't. That's just the reality.
Steve?
Now, Dan, you're on the steering committee for the Marine City Highway Corridor Study, correct?
The what?
You are a member of the steering committee for the Marine City Highway Corridor Study, am I correct?
Yeah, I'm one of the
One of
many people that are
18
on that.
people on the steering committee, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this study requires, would you agree, a lot of cooperation from the 4 townships, the counties, the state, to make this thing fly. It's going to take a lot of cooperation. Would I be correct on that?
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. And looking at just the zoning piece of it in the study, where you have master plans from 4 townships and what they're proposing for changes, that would require tremendous cooperation, not only from the townships, but the citizens of those townships to change that, correct?
Well, the one thing that, you sound like a lawyer right now, which I know you are. The one thing you have to know, which I'm not sure if you are aware because you weren't on the
There's a
street.
lot of
Do you
things
want
I'm aware
to,
about.
Steve,
Tell me
do
what you wanna tell me.
Steve, do you want to do the 26-mile presentation and ask the questions? Dan will be here.
Yeah, a quick question, then, well, if Dan's going to be here for that, he's going to be speaking.
Yeah, you're hanging
I'll
around.
be here. I
Yeah.
was just trying to answer your question.
Yeah, let our weight trim fellow there do his thing, and
Actually,
then,
that's excellent.
I jumped the gun a lot.
Answer your question.
all right, we're actually kind of on a tight time. You wanted,
Give me the elbow.
Justin, I don't think you need to stick around.
Justin, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
All right, well, good afternoon, Commissioners. Commissioner Bohm kind of teed everything up in terms of the history of this project, so I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm just going to turn it over to Adam Young from Wade Trim. So as you know, Wade Trim did the study, started back at the beginning of 2022, and we're kind of at that point now where we've got some findings and recommendations, and he's going to kind of take you through that study that you all, I think, have in front of you. So Adam, take it away once it's up there.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Young from Wade Trim. I'm the project manager for this effort. I'm a professional planner at Wade Trim and have been working there for 23 years now. And we were selected by a group from the county to help walk the steering committee, this consortium really of entities led by St. Clair County with participation from all of those folks that you saw on the front page of the report. It included participation from every local municipality within the corridor, the 4 townships, but we also included East China Township and the city of Marine City, who are participants in there as well, even though they don't. East China Township actually does not have land that directly fronts the corridor, but it's certainly tied to it and within it. So The project, as we said, has taken, we started really, our first kickoff meeting was, I think, January, so about a year ago. So it's taken us a year, but the pre-planning before it took some time before that as well. Just a little overview, and then I'll be available, of course, for questions. This is the study area. It's an 11-mile long corridor. I heard a lot of people call it 26-mile. 26-mile is the official name. It's in the Macomb County side until it hits the county line road there, the county line, and then it's Marine City Highway through through that largely rural area of St. Clair County. The kind of going into the project, the planning approach or the ideas that we brought into it are to ensure that in order to have a shared vision, this is a multi-jurisdictional corridor. And with Michigan, each local municipality has local control. They can do what they want. They have their own plans. They have their own ordinances. And sometimes when that happens, you lose the communication or the coordination, the uniformity within the corridor. And so in order to we felt we really needed to take a step back and look at the corridor as a whole, not just one piece of the corridor. The road itself is the border between townships to the north and south. So even immediately across the road is a different municipality with different rules, with different leadership, with different ideas. So that was very important. Bringing in the long-term perspective, our plan kind of looked at a planning horizon of 20 years into the future. Be prepared for inevitable change. Certainly that's something that we needed to be proactive and not just be reactive to things. So ideas that are presented in the plan are looking to get ahead of it, to be able to plan ahead, we're fortunate right now that we have the ability to be able to come up with a plan and to be able to manage growth and be able to protect our resources. A lot of the things that we heard during the course of the study is that we like, our rural character right now, and so that's a key element of the plan. But we have to be prepared in order to manage that growth and protect what we care about. A very important issue of just making sure that we're aligned with whatever we would plan for growth would be commensurate with available or planned or needed road and infrastructure capacities. And then, of course, maintaining local control. So this is a study. The recommendations in the plan are not things that are automatically then transferred over to each local municipality in the corridor. It's going to be their responsibility over time as they amend their master plans, for example, to make it, if they agree with the study's recommendations, to kind of implement that in their own local plans and ordinances. We talked about some of the steering committee leadership. The steering committee met probably about once every other month is what I think it turned out to be during the course of this past year. We looked at land use, we looked at market evaluation, transportation, water and sewer and infrastructure capacities. We looked at local plans and zoning and came up with recommendations along with an implementation strategy. A key component of our effort was public engagement, and we generated quite a bit of feedback. There was a lot of interest, significant interest in this study. There's a picture of the forum that was held in July this summer. More than 100 attendees. I think it was closer to more 200. I think 100 are the people who actually signed in. But that room at the, I think, Harvest Church in Marine City was packed for that meeting. A lot of interest in this and a lot of expressions of, we understand that this is a corridor that's ripe for growth and there could be an opportunity to accommodate some growth, but we need to understand also that this is, we moved out here for the rural characteristics and we don't want to lose that. We had an online survey that generated more than 1,400 responses, so a really significant response rate. We had discussions with key stakeholders. We had interviews with real estate professionals in the area. We had discussions with planning commissions from the local municipalities during the course of the process. Getting in, just kind of touching on the key recommendations, and you do have the report in front of you, and even the report doesn't have all the details. The report is intentional to be not, overwhelming anyone who would read this report with a 150-page document, but really to be kind of something that can be easily digested by those who are interested. And we know that a lot of people were interested in this study. with regard to land use and development, you can just kind of see that one of the things that we did in the study is establishing a proposed future land use plan for the corridor. The maps here, we've got one map on the left, it's kind of the top part and the bottom part, if you can see that. The top part is the west half of the corridor, the bottom part is the east half. That map shows the currently adopted future land use classifications from the local municipalities in the corridor. So what do their currently adopted master plans say? On the right, you've got the currently adopted zoning districts within the corridor. And then you can see our corridor future land use plan is very much in line with what already is kind of adopted or currently planned or zoned. That top part again is the western half of the corridor, and you can see that's where we're looking to concentrate to be able to accommodate some growth. And largely that would be industrial growth is what our team and the stakeholders that we looked at came up with as the key really market opportunity or economic development opportunity. And so there's that stretch of the western part of Marine City Highway there is able to, already has industrial use scattered along that portion of the corridor and would be the most logical location for larger kind of target industries, industrial development there. But there are nodes that already have commercial uses. We also have the eastern part of the corridor, kind of as you get closer to the city of Marine City. The city has an industrial area in that location. There are future plans for commercial growth and maybe even residential growth at that node. So in terms of, I talked about how we want to coordinate infrastructure and land use at the same time. The infrastructure improvements as recommended in this study are focused in the west end and really the east end on where the growth would be proposed. It was throughout the course of the study, we heard many times about how uncoordinated or even inconsistent local zoning regulations is a hindrance to development, even where you'd have such a difference between Casco Township on the north side of the highway and Ira Township on the south side of the highway with a required minimum setbacks, where one community it's over 100 feet, 150 feet is a required setback, and just on the other side of the road it's as small as 25, 35, 40 feet from the road. So just a clear example of the discrepancies there. And so in the study, there's specific recommendations for developing kind of more uniform zoning schemes that relate to building placement and design, signage, landscaping, lighting, off-street parking, access management, with some recommendations. And kind of one of the things that we'd like to do is carry the momentum forward of this study, the movement that we've had, the fact that we've had these entities in the same room during the course of the steering committee meetings. A recommendation is to kind of transition that steering committee into a Marine City Highway Planning Committee that would help continue to meet regularly to discuss key issues and to help implement some of the recommendations to move this forward. And that's one of the things is to have that committee to discuss zoning changes, zoning amendments. A suggestion that we have is to establish maybe a uniform corridor overlay district that could be adopted by each of the local municipalities in the corridor so that there truly is kind of a uniform, really one size fits all. So if even an interested property owner who would be looking at the north side of the road doesn't have to go to one community then the next community if they're looking at the south side of the road, if the codes are similar on both sides. Our traffic engineer, Lori Pollock, led the development of a traffic and a transportation plan for the corridor. This included traffic counts, working with SEMCOG and looking at estimates, basically a detailed travel demand study. That's not, the detail isn't in the report, but the appendix includes the detail with that particular study. Using kind of the current traffic in place, along with estimates by SEMCOG if there were no development that were to occur, and then adding the proposed growth that would occur, the traffic that would be generated by the new uses that could be allowed over the course of the 20-year horizon of the plan. Once you have that in place, you can then develop, okay, what improvements would we need to maintain an acceptable level of service for Marine City Highway? As we know, it's a 2-lane road for almost the entirety of the 11-mile corridor. And this This graphic here, I know it's hard to read, I'll kind of try and summarize it. So on the top left, again, is the western half of the corridor. Shoot, even the colors are kind of hard to differentiate, but ultimately with regard to the cross-section of the road, one of the things that citizens were concerned about is, oh, you don't want to have a 5-lane road for the entire 11-mile length of the corridor. Our recommendation ultimately, based on the projected growth, is to increase the width, to expand the width of the road in order to accommodate that safely to a 5-lane cross-section, but that would only need to occur through and a little bit beyond Church Road. That's essentially maybe the first 2.5 miles of the segment, and the remainder of the corridor will remain that 2-lane cross-section with intersection improvements, acceleration lanes, deceleration lanes, signal timing. There already is planned the Palms Road roundabout at that location. We're recommending one additional roundabout at Marsh Road on the eastern end of the corridor because of the traffic safety analysis that we had, a number of very serious and even fatal accidents that occurred at that location. And so the roundabout at that location is warranted. Infrastructure plan, so we reached out to local utility authorities. We did investigations of available infrastructure and capacities. This map just shows kind of the sparse current kind of coverage of water and sewer, or both water and sewer. And we really do just have water and sewer availability in the east end for the city of Marine City. And then on the west end, it's all provided through the Ira Township system, but even then is spotty. We took a look at, again, with the projected 20-year growth in the area, and took a look at formulas in order to evaluate, okay, based on this new growth, what infrastructure capacity, what infrastructure improvements need to be made in order to accommodate that growth. In the western end of the corridor, and it was kind of discussed a little bit, really the key impediment to be able to support new growth is the lack of treatment capacity at the sewer plant in that Ira Township operates there. And so basically you have an opportunity to either construct a new wastewater treatment plant there or expand the current wastewater treatment plant. That's the biggest ticket item in terms of infrastructure costs in order to make that happen. But there are also some conveyance or distribution capacity improvements that are needed. 2 pump stations need to be upgraded. The water main system for between Bethune and Church Road up to Meldrum Road is not a loop system right now, and so that needs to be upgraded, and that would result in a line running down, I think, Palms Road in order to complete that water main loop there for the necessary pressure improvements. On the eastern end, the city of Marine City operates both a water treatment plant and a wastewater treatment plant that have available capacity. The issue there is the distribution and the conveyance system that does not have the adequate sewer flow capacities at the pump stations. 2 pump stations are required to be upgraded. We looked at other options. Could we bring sewer water to the central portion of the corridor? In the end, the bottom line is that the practical alternatives are using, basically concentrating development on the ends, and that's where you would focus the infrastructure improvements. The central portion of the corridor is just cost ineffective in order to establish, and there simply aren't capacities or improvements that can be made in a cost-effective manner in order to bring infrastructure to that location of the corridor. And further, it didn't align with citizen desires for keeping a large portion of the corridor rural as it is today. We worked with Luke Bonner, an economic development specialist on our team, who did an economic development strategy, and kind of the quick summary of that. And I mentioned that, and it was discussed also by the guest who phoned in, that the industrial market right now is at an unprecedented demand for industrial, and that really is the greatest opportunity for growth within the corridor. St. Clair County has been working toward its target industries, the 4 target industries there: mobility and automotive, advanced manufacturing, energy distribution and generation, Although we talk about in the plan how an energy generation facility in the corridor is not appropriate, but certainly markets that would cater to that energy market could be an appropriate use for the corridor, warehouse distribution and logistics. Retail and office markets are not a significant opportunity, but certainly as if growth does occur within the corridor, you do need to have retail and office to serve kind of a supporting land use to the additional employees that would be in the corridor. If residential growth occurs at the ends, then you would need additional retail and office opportunities to serve them. But largely, the retail market is basically saturated because of all the development that's occurred in Macomb County. As we talked about, and this was mentioned during a number of our focus group sessions and discussions with real estate professionals and prospective investors in the area, that what we're lacking right now in the corridor in order to have that strong foundation or position in order to be able to attract a new economic development is that long-term preparedness, being ready for it. And it's illustrated by the lack of that coordinated zoning or lack of uniformity within the corridor, a strategy to develop a unique identity. Even people here tonight who's calling it 26 Mile Road, or is it Marine City Highway? So coming up with an identity for the corridor is something that's been really holding the corridor back, according to the people that we've talked to during the course of the project. Infrastructure improvements, as we said, are really a prerequisite, and notably to have that in place. As we talked about, some of these infrastructure improvements would be, a multi-year project in order to get that ready, and some investors simply are not willing to wait that time. Some infrastructure improvements certainly could happen as development occurs, but others are kind of needed up front. The EDA obviously has, done quite a bit of work on their own in order to kind of attract and retain workers locally, to help with training programs for employees in order to develop and make sure that residents in the area have those technical and foundational skills that are needed and in demand by those target industries. And then a key recommendation is the idea of preparing a shovel-ready site. And this is going to take, a partnership. It could be really a public partnership of the local municipalities, the county, the EDA, the regional economic development agencies, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, in order to work together. And so we talked, you heard some of the things that are going on at the regional level, that they can kind of bring resources locally in order to really try and help assemble and prepare these shovel-ready sites in order to attract new development. And then we do have an action strategy, just kind of trying to, again, build upon the momentum from this study to not let it lose that momentum, kind of outlining a roadmap from simple things as, approving or adopting this plan, but then, going on the road to the local municipalities again and going back to them and saying, okay, here's what we came up with collectively, here are the key steps, how can we participate with you? As I talked about, establishing or transitioning that project steering committee into a corridor planning committee. Potentially you have the option, and we discussed it in the plan, of creating a multi-jurisdictional corridor improvement authority. That's more of a formal committee that could meet. Other ideas, such as establishing like a joint administrative review committee for site plans for any development that occurs in the corridor, where we have multiple people at the table from each local municipality. What we talked about from the very beginning is what happens on the west end of the corridor matters to people on the other communities in the east end of the corridor. We're working together, and so why shouldn't they have kind of a voice at the table for a proposed development on one side and the other? And so that's just being able to provide input in that and continuing that idea of taking a step back and not just taking a site-specific mindset, but looking at what's good for the corridor as a whole. So I know we're pressed for time, but this is really kind of a short, very concise summary of this. There's a lot of effort and detail that went into this study. It's just myself from my team tonight. We have others from our team, of course, and I'm open to and willing to having further discussions with any and all of you for if you would like or would want more details about what went into this and why we came up with what we did. So at that point, I guess I'll turn it back over to you, and I'll be happy to try and answer.
Questions? David?
And I've been a part of a lot of your meetings, and I brought this up. We do have Joe here, so I can make this fairly easy. I'm going to talk about the 4 townships. And they brought up at the last meeting that potentially a half a mile from Center Line of Road on 26 Mile Road to have the zoning district for the entire length. By doing that, you're taking 3 miles of his township. You're going to take, well, that's a little less than 10%. Ira Township, you'd take about 10% of their township that would have specific zoning. And I'm trying to mention this all positive to where everybody works together and has same zoning. I've talked with Dave Struck on this, and I'm serving as vice chair on the Planning Commission for Riley Township. I think that can all be done within 6 months if everybody put their heads together and got it done. The master plans could be adjusted. You'd have to have public hearings as required. But let's say, because the elected official in those communities, if the residents, and there's been positive and negative, so I'm not going to go that the residents don't want it or they do want it. Right. But the elected boards are the ones that are going to make those decisions, give directions to their planning commissions. If Casco Township says, you know, we really don't want to do this. It's all great. We got all this plans here. We don't want to do it. And I've talked with Joe quite a bit. So a lot of his zoning's already in place. But like you mentioned, the setbacks, the lighting, potential, the illumination, the signs, I mean, I could go over a lot of things. If one township opts out and says, we don't want no part of this, what's that do to the whole thing? Does that kind of put it all?
Yeah, I don't believe that that's going to happen, personally. I think that's why we did the plan. And I think if we hadn't done the plan and engaged a leadership from those communities, and very importantly, citizens from those communities, that we would be in a point where if we didn't do this study and we said, here's an overlay district that you should do for a uniform zoning scheme, I think that would get shot down right away. And I think going into this study, there is a fair amount of maybe, misinformation or maybe just fear about what might come, and that generated a lot of the public interest in this study. And we heard it from the beginning. This was not without its challenges and kind of without, having some uncomfortable meetings. But I think in the end, as we went through the process and when they saw the thought that went behind it and that we did really listen to them, that, we don't want this to be an 11-mile corridor of all industrial buildings, and that we are protecting what they care about. We're preserving, especially the eastern part of the corridor.
Well, we are pressed for time, so let me just mention one more thing. I've talked with Joe and the Ira Township Supervisor that pretty much their zoning already matches what you put down and what you brought up earlier. A lot of the zoning's already there. What you're going to have is the specific changes between each. But I think that's
I also believe
that's a hurdle that can be done fairly easy, I think.
Yeah, and I don't think communities are going to balk at that. I think there's going to be willingness to do that.
Any more? Steve?
Sure. Your last name again? I just missed it.
Young.
Young, okay. And you're a planner, right, with Wade Trim?
Correct.
And the steering committee on these, it's a substantial report. 18 people on the steering committee. Is it generally to be assumed that those on the steering committee fully support the report or your efforts, or no?
I don't have any reason to believe that they're not in support of our efforts.
All right. I mean, they're steering you, they're directing you, they're working with you, so I'm assuming that everyone on here supports your conclusions and your report and your work. That's
right. Yeah, I think, yeah.
There's about half of them from the county, a good portion from municipalities, and then some others. Now, the purpose of this study, it puts it in context for me. Was this to create growth or plan for growth or both? How would you? As a planner, I don't want to go in and say, we have one mindset over the other. It's to engage the community to find out what they would like to see. What's your determination of what the community would like to see? To create growth, plan for growth, both? I'm trying to see.
I would say to manage the growth that's inevitable to come and to plan for it, put it in the right areas, not haphazardly, and concentrate growth in one area, bring the utilities to those areas so that we can then keep the rest of the corridor largely in its kind of current state. I think
right, I mean, Macomb County is moving, Macomb County industry moves north, right? I mean, it's going to hit that's the border.
Right.
So it's coming, and it's already, parts of it are there, there's industrialization on each end.
Yep.
So your assessment was it was more to manage the growth that's coming as opposed to create a particular area of growth?
I think it's both.
Okay.
You manage growth by allowing for development in some areas, but, you know, keeping development away from others. So I
In the shovel-ready piece that Jeff talks about, you know, we know the importance from Dan Casey, they have shovel-ready and what that can do to bring instant, you know, development and all that.
Right.
But part of the, would it be fair to say that part of the report was written to create an area for shovel-ready sites? Was that one of the criteria?
I certainly think that if you're looking to allow for growth in certain areas, and that was part of the corridor plan, the economic development was an important part of that, and preparing shovel-ready sites in order to enable the communities to do that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, is this your report or Wade Trim's report, or how do you fit in? You're here presenting it.
Yeah.
Is it your report? I'm just curious.
I'm the project manager for the project,
Okay.
so I led
It's
it
your report.
as the planning consultant. But I don't like to ever say that this is my plan. It's not my plan. I'm
There-
a stakeholder.
There was multiple other facets too of Wade Trim individuals, like the traffic guy, this guy, that.
I got that. They were all concluded. We got the infrastructure report, traffic report, all those things as part of the study. I'm assuming this is the only study you did, was this study and the appendices, correct?
That's correct.
You didn't do any other studies or other pieces other than the 3 or 4 items, the focus group and the infrastructure plan and the traffic report, all summarized in your...
It's summarized in the report.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, all right. On that point, do you know what the county was charged for that report? Do you have any idea?
Yes, our fees for that
Yeah,
study.
how much did you, because I looked on what Carrie had presented, and it looked like it was,
125 to 150,
yeah,
somewhere in there.
140, up to 140-something thousand dollars.
Yeah.
Did we spend all of that on this report, or is there some left? I don't know.
I thought there was some left.
So we actually interviewed Dave, you want to talk about process quick? And so we went to all the townships prior to ever getting engaged in this study. We presented at every single township board, do you want to go forward
can
with
see
this,
what was-
or do you want to not go? So I just want to set the backdrop of that. And I told you earlier, 3 out of the 4 were 7, all the board, the elected officials, they wanted to do it, and China was 5-2. So before we even got engaged, we went to the community, we talked about this, we got the support.
Well, the report benefits certainly all of the townships affected, as well as the entire county. I'm not suggesting it doesn't. I'm just trying to see, I noticed in Carrie's report, there was that line item, and that was an ARPA fund distribution, and was appropriate distribution. I'm just curious what was paid for that, so.
Yeah, I think, you know, as of the last invoice that we paid, we were under, and I know that we just got an invoice sent over today that I haven't had a chance to look at because I was in a meeting previous to this.
I'm not looking for nickels and dimes, just
Yeah.
wanted, it sounds like we spent over 100 grand for a report, and there's a
We
little
did.
bit left, and that answers my question. Now, for Adam, do you live in St. Clair County? Probably not.
No,
Do you have any family in St. Clair County?
I do not.
Have you ever spent much time in St. Clair County? Have you come here and visit or hang around?
Certainly.
I mean, other than for this job or for your work, do you recreate here, or, I don't know?
Yes, so in particular, I come here for work. I'm the planning consultant for East China Township and also the city of Marine City.
Okay.
So in that capacity, I'm here quite regularly, convening with those communities.
Yeah, see, that kind of tells me how you're tuned into, you know, where you're coming from on your report. I don't want to pry, but, so you've spent some time here, so. I'm trying to take too much of your time. Some of these conclusions, like, you know, Jeff, do you want us to get into any of the specifics of the report, or just like accept?
No, I mean, if you have questions.
Just a couple questions.
Yeah.
You know, like, one of the conclusions says the geographic area from where businesses or establishments could be reasonably expected to draw customers and visitors. That's like, and there's 2 or 3 of those that jumped out at me like, yeah, I mean, doesn't every place have that potential? I mean, so some of it was very general, broad oversight, and other parts were maybe more specific. Is that common in these types of reports?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the intents for a report is to not overwhelm anyone, and I think the reader of the report certainly is you all and us professionals, but I think more so it's to the local leadership, the citizens of the corridor and stakeholders in the corridor. So
Well, one of the
you
things
find
was,
that that's, the way that it's written, that's in general. I think part of that is, intentional to make sure that the point.
it's certainly a very thorough report. One of them said, we have an aging population. Well, I guess that's my fault, I'm part of that deal. But, so you included a lot of basic information from all kinds of federal, state sources, a lot of data.
Yep.
That's where you drew that from. This affordability piece on page 11, there's not page 11, where'd it go? Yeah, on page 13, ESRI. Are you familiar with ESRI personally?
Yes.
Do you know much about who they are and what they do and where they're from?
Yes.
And do you believe their data is, you rely on their data and you like using their data?
Yes, we've relied on their data for a variety of projects. Yep.
Okay.
It's a entity out of California. It's a worldwide kind of.
Yeah, Environmental
well
Systems
Yeah.
Research Institute, this Jake and
Yes.
Laura Dangermoder, they have an animal preserve, and I was looking into some of what their data was, but they're,
Sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
pardon me?
I didn't catch that last part.
I guess it's Jack and Laura Dangenmond is,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how to pronounce it.
well, there's a lot, they're billionaires, and they have a lot of different interests, global interests. I just kind of caught my eye, when I look at stuff and I don't understand it, like ERSI, I said, what's ERSI? Or ESRI, I look into it, okay,
Yep.
it's just asking, it helps me put your report in context.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, that ESRI is basically an industry standard. So if you're familiar, the county has a.
The global positioning, the
GIS
GIS stuff, yeah, I saw
That's
that.
all ESRI.
We rely on it as as part of the, I just didn't realize who they were until I kind of looked at it.
Yeah.
I guess I wanted to know if Adam knew who he was dealing with and liked him, just kind of, poking around. The land use section, because I've been here so long, there was nothing really, it was just a lot of, I could drive through it and tell you everything on the land use piece of it, but I suppose it's beneficial for getting the grants and people that aren't familiar with the area that might have to look at it, because I was wondering, why do we need to pay for something like that when I've known all of that for 5-6 pages of stuff just driving through? But I suppose you need to put those in your reports so that people that aren't familiar with the area
Absolutely.
can see it, So this was not only written for the county, but also for persons who might view this to invest or grant the county money and that type of thing?
Master plans are often a marketing tool for the local municipality or the region. Yep.
This, and I'll try to be quick here, but this issue with the overlay zoning maps, I looked at that and I first thought was, gee, that's kind of usurps the township authority, but the way they work is this group comes up with an overlay map and they all agree to it and then abide by it, and that gives you the uniformity.
Absolutely.
And a lot of your recommendations for signage and fronts of buildings and setbacks and all that stuff was part of this overlay idea that maybe they'd all agree on. Is that?
Yeah, and even participate in that, having like a joint committee that helps regulate development within the overlay, consisting of people from all of the entities within the corridor.
And on Dave's question, where you have 4 townships, and I've tried to get a lot of people to agree at one time, and when there's more than one, it's pretty hard sometimes, And so here we have 4 townships. If one opts out, you could still do a uniform overlay with the other ones and still have those shovel-ready sites in the other areas if those communities supported that and wanted that, correct?
If it came to that, we would figure out a way, but
So, your plan, your overall vision, your planning, this is a viable economic driver. It doesn't require 100% participation by 100% of every township, municipality, and so forth. You could get 80% buy-in and still make it work?
I would agree that the project is not a waste of money if 1 out of the 4 or 1 out of the 6 communities.
I'm not saying your study's a waste of money or the project's a waste of money.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see in my own head, if they're gonna develop this corridor and 80% or 75% of the communities down there want it and they go that route, is the planning piece of it still fairly correct? It's still, the assumptions are still fairly correct, I would assume so.
Yeah.
Okay. These, the zoning and policy recommendations, there, you make a ton of them. In the zoning and policy recommendation piece, is that kind of a piece, that's kind of a all-in on that? If you don't get that, everything, does that diminish the rest of it? Or, again, can you piecemeal that?
I think the zoning part of it is very critical because, all of this is related.
Yeah, I would
You
agree.
can't have the land use growth without the infrastructure,
Right,
without
that's-
the traffic, and also the zoning.
Yeah.
I think that's a key part. As kind of mentioned, I think you even alluded to, we need to knock that out within the first 6 months after this plan is.
It helps me understand how
I would
your,
agree with that.
it helps me understand how your study works.
Yes.
On the transportation plan, you use these no-build conclusions as a baseline?
Right.
And what do? Like a best guess estimation planning for the build?
Exactly. So
Explain how that
what
might work.
What we actually did is you saw that colored future land use map. We actually applied and we, kind of took actual sites, put a one-story building of a certain square footage, figured out where is the access going to come in, assumed that maybe sites would be assembled and kind of compiled into larger sites. So we
I feel-
floor space that generated then traffic counts for planned demand. It generated then what's the water capacity need and sewer for those.
Yeah,
and that's how-
I felt sorry for the people in the audience because I needed a magnifying glass to look at some of that stuff, and it's all in there. And that was my question. So that's kind of that piece of it seemed like it would be important that it be uniform throughout that district.
Right.
And that's,
We did that for each mile segment of the corridor. So if you wanted to get into the details, and some of those details aren't in the report, but we could tell you what the projection is for,
I got it.
industrial square footage, commercial square footage, traffic counts.
I'll turn to the matrix piece of it. On your last end of it is your timeline matrix. Of course,
Yeah.
the first thing in your timeline is adopt my report. I like that. The first thing, hey, adopt my report, right? Well, I would suggest we move that down a bit to make sure you have a buy-in. I don't mind receiving and filing a report, but I don't know that I'd want to just, I don't think we're here tonight to adopt anything. We're just receiving it and looking at it, right?
At this stage, you got it.
Yeah, and so, you have the first step, couple things immediate, and then the next thing you do is 1 to 2 years and then 3 to 5 years. So from that, it looks like this implementation piece of it is after 5 years. So you're telling me that it's probably going to take close to 5 years to get that shovel-ready project in place, or no?
Yeah, I guess I'd have to double check that specifically. I think up front, as I mentioned in the presentation, that one of the infrastructure improvements, the biggest one, the most critical one, is the sewer capacity improvements that would serve the western portion of the corridor. I don't believe that might, continued implementation of that might be in the 5-year plan, but I think it's also in the 1 to 2 years to start the groundwork, the preliminary engineering and thoughts and designs and studies to get that going. I think that's mentioned in there. If it's not, that's.
It looked to me like on your timing matrix, the good part of the first 2 years was just basic planning and buy-in, and then it wasn't until after this 3 to 5 year period that you might actually do implementation, but am I correct?
I don't believe that's the case. I'll double check, and if it's not
Okay.
reflected correctly in the report, then that's a mistake on my part. But the road and infrastructure improvements, as well as the zoning, all need to really start hitting the ground from the very beginning.
I guess to wrap it up, to me, I'm looking at it, I looked at this, and I really did spend a lot of time looking over your plan. I really tried to digest all that, and I actually like challenging reading. So, but to me, it looks like right now, it's a square peg in a round hole. And unless you get that ready for that round peg, you need to have that ready, and that's gonna take some time. So if the county commission commits to go down this road with the plan, I wanna get a good understanding of that. And the development's coming anyway, whether we like it or not. So I think the plan's gonna be useful to help people plan for it, but that's.
So Ira Township, and again, Dave and myself have been in multiple meetings down there with them. They are looking to move forward with the wastewater treatment facility sooner than later, okay? So their concept, and I'm not gonna put words in their mouth, but we talked about the other night, was they would actually own the treatment facility, they would run it, they would do everything, that's on them. What they're looking for from the county is participation in the collection system, which is the pipe in the ground. Help us run 3, 4, 5 miles or whatever, the pipe. And that's the part where the dollar figures, which we would loan the money, hence we would get paid back on the tax capture, Dan Casey, the LDFA, and if there wasn't so much activity, and this is a long-term dive into this corridor. We have never in 18 years, we've talked about Marine City Highway, 26 Mile Road, whatever you're going, we have never taken it to this level of in-depth, so on and so forth. And, we did with the previous board just because everybody on the board at that time said the Marine City corridor and, and Dan Casey and everything, that is going to be the next potential area for some job creation. I was never a proponent of the next Hall Road, right? That's what I think everybody, when it first came out, it was, oh my God, we're going to be Hall Road. I'm in my mindset, I'm looking to try to get 3 or 4 60, 80, 100 acre parcels
I get it.
ready for the next, hopefully, I hope we get 4 more magnets, right? That types of things. Because in my mind, if you can have a good job and you can live in St. Clair County, 40% of our people, right, Dan, of the living wages work outside of St. Clair County, 40%. If we can, if we can bring a good job and it's right in your backyard, it's pretty darn good living.
As I said, Macomb County industry is moving this way, and you're not going to stop it no matter how much you would want to, if you wanted to. So that's a unique area. I've lived here my whole life. I've driven through the area to hunt and fish. I got friends down there. I fish down there and all that. So I'm really familiar with it, and I've watched what's happened in the last, unfortunately, 35, 40 years, So I think the time is right to look at that and have a planning study that I think is going to be beneficial to people. But that begs the question of whether we use ARPA money for that. I'm not convinced that's the right thing to do. I'd like to have a discussion about that. So that's where I come from. So I appreciate the work they did. I think it was overpriced, but I appreciate the work they did.
They were low bidder out of the 3 or 4 bids that we got, so.
That's okay. I'm cheap. Everything's overpriced. But it's okay.
I could take 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Just because I'm on the steering committee does not mean I support a 26-mile corridor, if that's insinuated. What I do support is this report and to gather the information to assist Casco and Ira Township, who I represent. Because without this information, they wouldn't have all this expertise. They'd have to go and pay for it themselves. This needs to be done so they can do it potentially in their betterment and St. Clair County. But I supported this and wanted to be part of it because I'm the commissioner for that area. So not everybody on here would support a 26-mile corridor.
I was not a commissioner then. I didn't attend any of the meetings. I know some of the people on it, you, Dave, but we haven't talked a whole lot about it. But that's.
We got about 10 minutes, so Jeff's got to get this.
Yeah, you want to wrap it up in a couple minutes so we can get a little bathroom break? Any other questions at all for these guys while we got them? Okay.
You could come up with more if you want.
We don't need a definitive answer right now, but in the very near future, we have to, what I would like to do is get maybe some of the other commissioners, if you're available, to meet with some of the individuals down in Ira Township to we've been in a bunch of meetings, right? We're hearing it firsthand, but to go down and see what they're talking about, what they're proposing. There's some.
Like a roadshow thing, or?
We'll meet with them to the plant, basically what they're talking about doing down there, I guess.
You're going to take this study and go around with it, you're saying?
Well, not the study, what the IRA's looking to do for the treatment facility. We need to know, I guess, from their perspective, if we are in or out sooner than later, because the next thing, if we're willing to go down the path, then we really need to start doing some of the engineering work and some of those other things necessary. This piece, along with some of the other engineering, will give us opportunity to go be able to apply for some grants at the end of the day. I'm fairly confident with the money that's flying around that there again, I hate to say it, but I didn't have anything to bring to the last congressional ask. It was not available. But I'm fairly confident if I had something in my hand, I probably would have came away with $5 million or so to help assist in some of this. And I told you, we have another project that IRA is willing to accept, the Renaissance Zone, which could give them substantial money up front. And then the county may not have to participate, those types of things. So
Just because the money was sent from Congress doesn't mean we have to spend it like we're in Congress. Make sure we look at it close.
these are loans that we are getting paid back on. This is not handing anybody over 10 or 15 million bucks.
I like that part.
County wants their money back.
You introduced me to the LDFA thing a month and a half ago. We talked about that and I looked into it. It's very interesting.
Yeah,
It's not available for all localities, but it's available for the ones that are a little more up to speed, the more industrialized and so.
yeah, to the tune of 1.5 million in St. Clair to capture to help offset their 7 or 8 million. So the payback, I mean, I'm not into this 30-year, you get a company and you don't see any money of it, but I mean, there's always a reasonable period of time if you're willing to, I think, and they're all necessary, and I said earlier in the thing, I know I sound like a broken record, if the county's not willing to lead in these efforts, it ain't gonna happen, period. So are we willing to step up and go lead to try to get jobs and tax base? That's if we are, then these are the kinds of things we gotta look at.
You just can't lead at the expense of other things that may be more necessary. I want to have that discussion. That's all I'm asking.
Okay. Let's move on. Thank you very much. Any other matters? Motion, receive and file?
So move.
Support.
Discussion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Item 7, adjournment.
Motion to adjourn?
Do we have to?
All in favor?
Aye.
Take a little bathroom break and we'll be back here at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.